Good afternoon, everyone, and we are delighted to have you join our webinar this afternoon. This is, I think, the webinar you have all been waiting for. Anyone who is interested in working conditions, and indeed anyone who is interested in a wide range of policy issues which are affected by working conditions, should be tuned in to this webinar this afternoon. Today, we are delighted to be in a position to discuss, reveal, elaborate and flesh out the most recent findings from our European Working Conditions Survey. For those of you who follow us, you know that this is a pan-European flagship survey that Eurofound has carried out for the last 30 odd years, since 1990. It's its 8th iteration, and we are really thrilled to be able to share today some of the main findings from this survey. It couldn't be more timely. We're talking a lot about job quality. We have the job quality roadmap, which is being discussed at EU level. We have the competitiveness compass. We have the skills agenda. And indeed, we have the plans for a housing plan and, of course, the anti-poverty strategy. You might ask, how are these things related to working conditions? Well, that's something we're going to explore a little bit today. So I'm delighted to have you all join us here today. I mean, we are seeing that there are positive shifts in job quality over the last period, and our expert, who will join us shortly, will outline some of them. But we're also interested in exploring a little bit the inequalities, because not all people, not all workers are benefiting in the same way from the kind of improvements that we have seen and the shift in progress in job quality over the last little while. So today we will be joined by Barbara Gerstenberger. Barbara, for many of you who work in this area, who follow Eurofound, know her well. She's the head of unit of the Working Life unit here in Eurofound, and she is our expert today, who will join us as we uncover the persistent inequalities in European working conditions, drawing on the results of our Working Conditions Survey. Barbara, you are very welcome.
Good afternoon, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone who is watching us online. It's a delight to be here.
I'm delighted to have you again. I would also remind all of you who are joining us today, though, that this is an opportunity for you also to put your questions. So whereas we will start off revealing some of the main findings and discussing them, please do join us in the chat, and we will hope to get to as many questions as possible as we go through this next hour together. I will gather some of them, and they will be moderated in the account that you can see there in the chat at the side. Likewise, if you would like to join us on social media, join any of our channels, and you can continue to have this chat amongst yourselves. So Barbara, to start off, can we just really talk about the Working Conditions Survey itself? We talk about it as being a flagship survey. We talk about it as being sort of a gold star intervention when it comes to working conditions. But can you talk to us where it came from, where it started, and what its main objective was?
Yes, when we started in 1990, as you said before, with the first round of the European Working Conditions Survey, we started small. The questionnaire at the time had around 30 questions, very much focused on working conditions. And we conducted the survey in the 12 countries that at the time constitute the EU. Since then, we have repeated it every 5 years. The survey questionnaire has grown. We now have more than 120 questions in that questionnaire. And of course, the number of participating countries has increased as well, because the EU has grown, but also because we now include other European countries. So the last survey, 2024, was conducted in 35 countries.
So that's the EU member states, and then beyond with some of the candidate countries, Norway. I mean, who else are we including in this?
Norway and Switzerland, and a number of Western Balkan countries as well. So 35 altogether.
Okay. And I know that there's always a question about surveys, and in fact, we have several discussions of that in-house when we see these high-level findings being touted across the board in the media. How do we make sure that our survey is as robust and representative as it possibly can be?
Well, it all starts out with a good questionnaire, and we take great care in consulting with experts, consulting with the social partners. That's very important to make sure that the questions that we ask really capture those real world phenomena that we are interested in. So the questionnaire, that's the first part. Then we take great care in recruiting experienced interviewers. We train them specifically for this task. And then the third area, extremely important is to ensure that we select a sample that is representative of the labor force in the participating countries. So we're doing this by using high quality registers where they exist. In countries where they don't exist, we follow a random route procedure. But in the end, the 1,000 respondents that we select per country are representative of the labor force in that country. And then once field work is finished, of course, we need to apply weights in order to balance any imbalances that we still might have in that sample, and to also ensure that the size of the countries, the very different sizes of EU member states, are reflected when we then look at EU level results.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fair to say that as we've now discussed these top level and more in-depth findings, we really are looking at the gold standard of surveys in terms of that we can rely on these facts and findings being a true representation of what is happening in the workplace across the European Union and indeed beyond. So let's get down to it, Barbara.
Okay, absolutely.
We have been at this for the last 30 odd years, so we can see some change and some development during this period of time. But tell me, what are the top level findings that we found in this current iteration of the survey?
When we look at the top level findings, there is a lot of good news. You pointed to it already. So we see that many of the job quality dimensions have actually improved. The physical environment has improved since 2010. Workplaces today see less noise, less smoke, vapor, fumes, less exposure to tiring positions. But this is all a very positive development when it comes to the physical environment. Working time quality has improved. There are fewer workers who work long hours, who work atypical hours, so weekends and night shifts, etc., and more workers who have access to flexible working time arrangements. That's also a very important aspect of working time quality. The biggest improvement we have seen in the skills and discretion index, mainly because a lot more workers have access to training. And I think in the current discussion about how do we get ready for transitions, for change, that is extremely important. More workers report that they feel their job offers good prospects. That has increased quite a bit since 2010. Now, we need to keep in mind that, of course, in 2024, we were looking at relatively tight labor markets. So it's not that surprising that there is a relatively low level of job insecurity, and the workers generally feel they have good prospects. Where we are not moving in the right direction is in the area of work intensity. Work intensity is increasing for women, and because of that, the index as a whole is declining, so it's less good than what we saw in 2015 and in 2010. And the social environment index, again, is deteriorating for women, improving for men, but overall, we're back to 2010 levels, so no further improvement than that. So that's the overall picture. But as I said, there is a lot of good news in there as well.
Yeah, I think it's good to start that out, certainly outlining the good news story, because there is, as you say, quite a number of areas where we see improvements. And before we move into that, I do want to just highlight this, because we have a question immediately from Laurent Aujean, who is saying that the 2020-2021 was a mess because of COVID, not only with the surveys, impacted on the EWCS, we know that. We were agile and we adjusted to the circumstances and went via telephone interviews. The question is 2024 considered better quality, and are our results this time comparable with our results of the EWCTS, as we called it? Now, this is a critical question, Barbara. I just want you to deal with it so that we can move on.
Absolutely. And a very straightforward answer to the second part of the question. We do not compare the results of 2024 to 2021. We will always compare to 2015 when we used the same survey mode, namely face-to-face interviews. So we are being very careful here, because any changes that we might see between 21 and 24, they could be because things really changed, but they could also be because we changed the mode of interviewing. Which survey is of better quality? I think that is something that the methodologists should discuss and decide. We are very proud of the 2021 survey as well. It gave us an excellent snapshot of the situation, the very specific situation in 2021. The results are super interesting, but again, the only thing that one should be extremely careful with, and that's why we are not doing it at all, is compare that 21 survey to previous waves and then also to the 2024 wave.
Thank you, Barbara, for that clarification. And Laurent, thank you for the question, because indeed that is something that we know has caused issues for several people who have been watching the surveys over the years, and it's good just to ensure that we have complete clarity on that. So moving on, Barbara, I mean, we also see that in this survey, we see that workers actually seem to value what we call a safe and trusting environment above nearly all other elements. I mean, why do you think that these factors have become the most important for workers in this survey?
Well, you're picking up on a new question that we added, so we can't really compare to previous waves. We added a new question, and I will share with you what exactly we asked. We asked respondents, while thinking about work in general, how important are these work-related aspects for you? And we gave them a list of 10 different aspects that are related to work. And then more than 70% of workers said, a safe working environment for my mental and physical health, that is very important. And then a little less than 70% said, a trusting working environment, that is very important. And then only third highest is the share of workers, 66%, who say good pay and benefits, that is for me a very important aspect of work. So why is this noteworthy? I think it gives a clear indication that when we are thinking about improving working conditions, improving job quality, that doesn't have to be an exclusive focus on pay. There are these other issues that probably also, at least partly as a result of the pandemic, workers now value at least as highly as good pay and benefits, namely a safe environment, not only physically safe, but also for my mental well-being and this trustful environment. I do want to add a caveat, however, because you can see that the current level of pay that workers enjoy is linked to how they reply to that question. Because if you break down the answers to that question by occupation, you will see that, for example, for elementary occupations, so low-skilled and therefore usually also low-paid occupations, guess what comes top? Good pay and benefits. So that we need to keep that in mind, that it depends on where a worker currently stands when it comes to pay and benefits, that will influence how she or he answers that question.
And Barbara, I perhaps be a little bit provocative here as well, that the she and he is important too in this, that we see we see slight more edge for pay for men rather than for what women want.
Absolutely, that is, and I have to say, we were somewhat surprised to see that it's especially young men who put good pay and benefits first, whereas for young women in the same age category, the safe working environment comes first. So that's quite interesting.
But I think your point is the overarching, that it's a holistic approach to a good job or a quality job that takes on board all of these elements, and not necessarily just the one or prioritizing one over the other. Yeah.
And I think those in charge of improving working conditions should take this into account. It is not always and exclusively about pay and benefits.
No, but clearly the psychological security, which we've heard about before, is a fundamental part of that. We also saw a decline in worker engagement, a slight decline in worker engagement. And also, maybe, is it a corresponding increase in monotonous tasks? Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What do you think is at play here? And are there new strategies in companies to help offset this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, engagement is good for workers, clearly, because high levels of engagement are positively related to workers' health and well-being. But engagement is also good for companies because there's a relationship with job performance, there's a relationship with creativity, with lower absenteeism, with higher employee retention if employees are engaged. And I would argue, especially in challenging times, when things are in flux, when we expect transitions, when we have to manage change, it is important that workers are enthusiastic about their work, that they feel full of energy when they come to work, that they feel absorbed so that time flies when they are at work. And 2 out of these 3 things that I just mentioned, that's where we saw the decline in the levels of energy. I'm energetic, I feel full of energy when I am at work, and this absorption. Time flies when I am at work. So both of these indicators have declined between 2015 and 2024. And then, as you said, 2 other related trends in the area of cognitive, the cognitive dimension at work. Fewer workers, a lower share of workers say that they can apply their own ideas at work. And more workers say that their work includes monotonous tasks. 50%, almost 50% of workers say my work includes monotonous tasks. So what can be done to bring these levels of engagement up again? Well, that's where the European Working Conditions Survey is so fascinating, because we can link elements of working conditions to these outcomes, and we can see that level of engagement is very clearly and strongly positive associated with skills and discretion and with the social environment. So if
all skills and discretion had improved.
That's true, but not so. For example, the applying your own ideas is one element of skills and discretion, and that obviously has not improved. So if workers are allowed to apply their knowledge, to learn, to develop, to apply some discretion, that will boost engagement. And a social environment where you feel supported by your managers, by your colleagues, a social environment that is free of adverse social behavior. Again, there's a strong link with engagement. Improving this will lift levels of engagement as well. Okay, interesting, Barbara. Again, this sort of interdependency of all of these elements is really fascinating, and being able to dig into it is one of the main assets of this survey, because it has so many dimensions that it can offer as a contribution to any discussion on improving job quality. I mean, one of the interesting things as well, though, from this survey was, clearly we will be looking also at the technological developments that you also kind of referenced obliquely there. But one of the interesting things was reflecting the current context. So you were seeing specific findings which relate to what perhaps is our new world of work. So more sedentary work, more exposure to heat, which would be to do with the climate change. Sedentary, is that because we're doing more of these monotonous tasks, or is it more to do with AI and digitalization? Is it more to do with the way we're working? What can you tell us about those new findings? Yeah, the issue of sitting, the sedentary work. So that, I would argue, is clearly related to the digitalization of work processes and the increase in computer use that we have seen over the decades. So more workers spend more time in front of screens, and you usually do that sitting down. So to be very precise, 40% of workers, and that's a slightly higher share for women than for men, are sitting for periods of at least 30 minutes for 3/4 of their working time. That is a lot of sitting. And as we know or have read, sitting is the new smoking. So this is really, there's such a clear link to workers' health and well-being, which is why we added this question on sitting, which we did not have in our catalog of physical risks before. So there is this link with digitalization and computer use. The exposure to high temperatures could be linked to climate change, because it's quite interesting to see that on the one hand, the share of workers who are always exposed to high temperatures has not changed much. It's around 5%, and it's been like this since the 1990s, because these are workers who work in kitchens, in bakeries, in foundries, so in hot workplaces. But what has changed is the share of workers who are episodically exposed to high temperatures. And high temperatures, maybe the definition is important, it's a temperature that makes you sweat even if you're not working. So that's the definition of high temperatures. So 1/4 to 3/4 of the time, back in 1995, 13% of workers said reported this type of exposure. In 24, it is 21%. So it has gone up quite a bit, especially for this group, episodic exposure to high temperatures. And the other indication that climate change does play a role here is the fact that the shares are much higher for construction, for agriculture, for transport. So those people who are out there and exposed to these conditions.
Okay, interesting again, though, to see that the Working Conditions Survey reflects these potential changes that we're seeing in our environment and situation. I mean, one of them also, of course, is technology. And we've seen digitalization roll out in our societies, in our workplaces. We've also seen generative AI take hold. And I know that the survey, for the first time, really dug deep into this area, which is good. Can you tell us a little bit? Can you take the temperature of where we are on the use of AI in the workplace? I mean, it seems to vary quite considerably across Europe, which maybe is indicative of what we saw previously about the take-up of digital tools. But what factors do you think are at play here in terms of that digital divide, Barbara?
Yeah. Well, as you said, this question about the use of generative AI was added in the 2024 survey. This said, we have explored the use of technologies, or other technologies, computers, etc., since the beginning of the survey. So there have always been questions around the use of technology. Now, the question on AI that we added was very, very precise, and that's important to keep in mind. So we asked, do you use the following equipment in your work? Artificial intelligence that simplifies complex mental tasks or makes recommendations on how you should be working. And in parentheses, we even gave some examples to make sure that the respondents knew what we were talking about: ChatGPT, Llama, DALL-E, etc., etc. So that was the question. And in the EU 27, 12% of workers replied yes to that question. So it's not a huge share, but as you indicated already, there is a widespread between the member states. So we have countries like Luxembourg where 25%, 1/4 of workers say, yes, we are using generative AI. And on the other hand of the spectrum, we have countries like Portugal and Romania where it's around 4%, so much, much lower. So the strongest explanatory factor behind this is probably the sectoral composition of the economy, because we know that generative AI is mainly used in knowledge-intensive sectors and occupations, and in countries like Luxembourg, Sweden, Belgium, the ones at the top, you have a much higher share of workers in those knowledge intensive sectors. So at the same time, we see some other rather worrying divides when it comes to AI use. Generative AI is used more by younger people than by older people. That's not that surprising, but it's also used across all age categories more by men than by women. So there is another gender gap, and this time
in that gap.
Yeah. Yes, this time it is when it comes to the use of generative AI, and that is worrying because it means that women would be at a disadvantage of using also the opportunity or making use of the opportunities that this new technology certainly also brings. So yeah, that's an interesting finding, and it's not only in the European working conditions that we survey that we see this; it has been confirmed by other research as well.
So to go back to your first finding about the growth in access of training, for example, we see that even though it may have progressed, it needs to progress further if it's to impact women, particularly in this area of generative AI, if we're to see any progress in that area.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned training, because of course we were starting to explore what could be the explanatory factors behind this gender gap in generative AI use. And some studies have shown that whereas women feel that they are not qualified yet to use it, they need training. That's the main obstacle for them not using them. Men have a tendency to say, well, the main obstacle is that my employer doesn't allow me to use it. So that is really quite interesting to see the reasons behind not yet using it. So, yeah.
And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that whole gender divide, because when we come to the inequalities, and I know that there are several questions in the chat about the gender divide, if you like, and the inequalities there. But I would like to come back to that when we touch on it slightly later. I want to talk a little bit more about technology. I mean, the survey also seems to find that the use of technology is creating more tasks than it is actually removing, which would be kind of counterintuitive for a lot of people when they think about this. I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about that? What does that actually mean? How does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, whenever new technologies are evolving and starting to be applied in the workplace, there is this fear that it will have a negative impact on jobs, be destroying jobs. Computers are taking our jobs, robots are taking our jobs, and now generative AI is taking our jobs. So we have asked respondents in the working conditions survey with respect to the use of all technologies. So not just generative AI. We have a long list of different technologies. Anybody who said we're using some of these technologies, and that's 3/4 of the respondents, were then asked, has this use of technology actually added tasks, and has it removed tasks? So 31% of workers say, yes, it has, the use of technology has removed some tasks to a large or to some extent, but a higher proportion, more than 40% of workers said it has actually added tasks to a large degree. So more tasks added than removed. There are big sectoral differences here that we need to be aware of. A much higher share of tasks removed and tasks added, for example, in financial services. So that seems to be the sector that is most affected by technology. But then we come to the question, what kind of tasks are being removed and added? Because especially with respect to generative AI, it could be that the tasks added are actually more monotonous and boring, in the sense that instead of creating content yourself, you are now quality controlling and reviewing masses of I was going to say
generated content.
masses of content that the AI tool has generated. But again, we don't see that yet reflected in the responses in the European Working Conditions Survey. The use of AI, the use of generative AI, is associated with actually a lower level of monotonous tasks and a higher level of workers assessing still their own quality of work, rather than being involved in reviewing and quality controlling what a machine or an AI tool has produced. So we don't really see a very negative impact on the content of tasks yet. Mind you, we are at the beginning of the analysis, and these are just first results.
Interestingly, one of the comments from Peter Austin, one of our audience, he says that from anecdotal experience, admin tasks often replace lower paid staff, while their admin functions are transferred to professional staff as part of an updated computer package. I mean, I think that's the kind of thing you're saying, is that we're at the beginning of this. We need to sort of explore it further, but you know, that sort of anecdotal experience or feedback from the workplace is useful for us trying to learn how this is playing out on an ongoing basis. I mean, Barbara, just to ask a question also, there was a question that came in about the gender gap in terms of the exposure to high temperatures, and whether you saw that same gender gap in that area. Would you know that offhand?
Well, if you look at the sectors that are most affected, construction, transport, agriculture, these are male-dominated sectors. So it's fair to say, I don't have the figures at my fingertips now, but it's a very well-informed guess that this is impacting more on men than on women.
Okay, and I mean, there's so many questions coming in about the gender or age differences. If you just bear with me, we're nearly there. We're going to hit the inequalities in a moment. But I think that the sort of final question that I wanted to ask around the technology side of things was about hybrid work. And we see that emergence post-pandemic, that we really have seen the development of remote work and hybrid work taking hold in terms of the way we work. It's kind of more or less a permanent feature, in some cases more so than in others. And of course, limited to particular types of jobs. We have to remember that it is, you know, a limited number of jobs that are actually teleworkable. But in terms of how that's impacting on workers' lives, I mean, are we seeing a divide here again in terms of who can access it and how it's playing out for women and men, perhaps, or younger and older workers?
Yeah. Well, let me give you the figures first. So indeed, it seems that hybrid work, telework, is here to stay. We have overall around 28% of workers who engage in telework. Very few still do it exclusively, work exclusively from home. That's around 3% of workers in our sample. Then a little lower, less than 10% have kind of a split. That's the hybrid work, you know, regular switch between office work and home work. And then we have a relatively large category, 16% of workers who usually work from the office, but occasionally are working from home. So one concern, as you said, is the fact that not everybody can telework, and not necessarily because the employer doesn't allow them to telework, but because the job does not deliver. And let's keep in mind that's more than 60% of workers who cannot telework because their job, the tasks that they're doing, are simply have to be done either in the employer's premises or in client's premises. They cannot be done.
So the other way around, Barbara, we're only talking about really a third of all jobs being teleworkable.
Absolutely. Yeah. But then the other concern is what does it do to your working life and your work-life balance? So We know it's good for work-life balance, and that's confirmed by the survey. It leads to more autonomy, more flexibility, and that's exactly, and better work-life balance, and that's exactly what workers are after, and why they like this opportunity to telework. But at the same time, we have, and again, not new but confirmed in the survey, we have this issue of blurring boundaries between work and private life. So especially for hybrid workers and occasional teleworkers, we see that there is a higher incidence of working during free time in order to cope with work demands. There's a higher incidence of being contacted outside of working hours, and there's a higher incidence of having to change private and family activities due to work-related requests. So this blurring of boundaries is a continuous issue, and in this case, women find it more difficult to cope with this and report more work-life conflict when they're teleworking compared to their male counterparts.
That is fascinating, Barbara. It leads us nicely into the ongoing gender divide. It's not the only divide we're talking about, but as you said earlier, we can't forget that there has been a lot of progress, that there has been many improvements across the board. But here, if we focus a little bit, as is the title of our current webinar, on the inequalities, the survey does expose inequalities. They can be across countries, they can be within countries, they can be within sectors, they can be between men and women, between old and young. What kind of inequalities do you think are most, I suppose, what have we found has emerged most in this survey?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as is the case for all Europe-wide surveys, if you just look at the EU averages, they hide these differences and these inequalities. And the first differences would be between countries. So we have still the usual front runners: Denmark, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Finland, who across the 7 dimensions of job quality score very, very high. But I have to say that this usual east-west, north-south divide that we're kind of used to, same countries ending up on the right-hand side of the graph all the time, that is breaking up a little bit. So just to say, best performer when it comes to prospects is Malta. Best social environment, Latvia. Lowest work intensity, which in this case is good, Poland. The best physical environment reported from Italy. So, we have a better spread when it comes to
what you know.
It's shaking things up again. But I think what we continue to need to pay attention to are the differences between sectors. So you have, on the one hand, the top performer here, financial services, highest job quality in all dimensions, except for work intensity, high work intensity. And then you have transport, where workers experience poorest job quality in 4 dimensions: poor prospects, poor working time quality, poor skills and discretion, and a poor social environment. Agriculture, poorest earnings. Construction, poorest physical environment. Health struggles with poor earnings, low working time quality, and highest work intensity. And you may have noted that all these sectors that I just mentioned are sectors experiencing labor shortages. So there's a message, I think, a very clear message when it comes to these sectoral gaps.
And also, I suppose, Barbara, they have also the element that many of them are female dominated.
Female or male dominated. I mean, I think we're going to get to that. The gender segregation is alive and kicking. That's very, very clear. So health would be female dominated, construction, agriculture, transport, male dominated. So we have it on both sides. We see similar differences in occupation. We see big gaps between workers with a foreign background and native workers. We see big differences between age groups. Young people under the age of 30 are not exactly spoiled when it comes to job quality, except as I mentioned earlier, they are at an advantage when it comes to technology use and especially AI. Older workers face different challenges, especially around training, and at a huge disadvantage when it comes to use of new technologies. So these are the divides and gaps, and that's before we even talk about gender.
I know, and they are considerable. They are considerable gaps that we are dealing with. And also, you mentioned that digital divide earlier on. Also, I mean, you also responded in part there to Maka Dolitze's question, which was on, does the WCS 2024 capture how immigration affects job quality, particularly in cases where qualified migrants are employed in jobs below their qualifications? I mean, that's a slightly different question, but in terms of what the WCS captures for migrant workers, you do have information on that, Barbara.
Yes, because we ask about the country of birth and even the country of birth of the parents. So we can distinguish first and second generation migrants. And that is one of the first deeper analysis that we are going to do with this data set to see what are the differences and what is exactly this risk of ending up in jobs for which migrant workers or workers with a foreign background are actually overqualified, and the kind of working conditions that they face in comparison to native-born workers.
Yeah, okay. Let's get into the gender gap in terms of job quality, Barbara. We're not talking about the pay gap. We're not talking about the employment gap here. We're talking about job quality. Talk to us about it. We've talked about this ad nauseum on different platforms, but please give us an outline of what we're seeing in the survey in terms of this.
Yeah, so the first statement is women and men experience very different job quality. So men report higher job quality than women in all job quality dimensions, 2 exceptions: working time quality, women are slightly favored, and the physical environment. The largest difference in job quality is, guess where, in the dimension of earnings between men and women. So I'm going to zoom in to the physical environment question, because I think that illustrates very well how different the work environment is for men and women. So men are more exposed to vibrations, chemicals, noise, high and low temperatures, carrying and moving heavy loads, breathing in smoke and solvents. So all those physical risks and demands associated with industrial jobs, with industry jobs. Women are more exposed to lifting or moving people, sedentary sitting, and infectious materials. So from this little example, I think it's very clear that gender segregation is the most important explanatory factor behind these differences. Men and women work in different sectors, in different occupations, and in different workplaces. So in the EWCS, we distinguish, at least initially in our initial analysis, 10 broad sectors. And 4 out of these 10 sectors are gender balanced. The rest is either male or female dominated. So gender balance is commerce and hospitality, financial services, public administration, and other services. And then you have construction and transport, heavily male dominated. On the other side, health, education, heavily female dominated. So similar picture for occupation. You have, on the one hand, the occupational category of craft workers, where the share of women is a whooping 11%. And then you have clerical support workers, and here more than less than or around 30% are men, and more than 70% are women. But the interesting thing is that even if you work in a gender balanced sector or gender balanced occupation, that doesn't mean that you are working with an equal share of men and women in your workplace. Because if we look at workplace gender balance, we see that only a quarter of workers in Europe work in a workplace where roughly half of the workforce is male and female. So there's this book title that indicates that men and women may come from different planets. I don't know whether that's true, but when it comes to work, they're definitely worlds apart.
So, plus ça change, Barbara, plus c'est la même chose in many ways. Okay, but let's not get too downtrodden when it comes to this. I mean, we did talk about the women's work intensity and that had deteriorated. I mean, do you think that had something to do with the pandemic? Because there's a lot of questions in here about resilience and, you know, whether we have data which can show us whether, you know, working conditions have impacted on our ability to be more resilient. Would you say that we are seeing a change in the way we work following the pandemic in the area here of work intensity for women in particular?
I don't think that the pandemic has had a big impact here. Again, the differences that we see between men and women when it comes to work intensity, and the reason why we see an increase in work intensity for women is, again, sector related. So women are much larger share of women are employed in sectors that have public-facing jobs. So they work with pupils and clients and patients, etc. And that means that they are to a much higher degree than men exposed to emotional demands. So when you are in these public-facing jobs, you very often have to hide your feelings. You have to work and deal with angry clients and angry patients. You experience emotionally disturbing situations. And yes, that certainly intensified during the pandemic, but I don't think anything has changed in the longer term as regards this exposure to the public and the emotional demands that comes with working in such workplaces. So
sorry, Barbara. In some ways, I might have understood that question in the pandemic way, but the question from Salvatore Zappala was, in the survey, have you noticed any gender or age differences in the process of recovery from work or after work? So I'm not quite sure whether that's after work and retirement or whether it's recovery from work, as in ensuring that work is sustainable and that you can continue with it. But maybe that's a good sort of segue for us to go into the age differences as well that you've seen. So
yeah. Maybe on the recovery from work, we have questions in the survey in the area of work-life conflict, where we ask about feeling too tired after work to do housework or any other related activities. We have questions around not being able to stop thinking about work, even though the day's work, at least the paid work, is finished. And there you do see gender differences, and women find it more difficult to switch off, especially, by the way, women who are engaged in telework, occasional or in hybrid form, have greater difficulties to switch off and regenerate, recharge their batteries once the working day is done. Maybe one last word also on the emotional demands, because that is also related to higher levels of fatigue, up to burnout. So that is why it is so important to address this risk of emotional demands at work, which women are a lot more exposed to than men because of the sectors that they work in.
Yeah, I mean, just slightly related to that, Barbara, I mean, we talked, or I talked in the introduction about the link between job quality and competitiveness. Now, I know that the survey itself is not looking at competitiveness per se, or even indeed productivity in that way, but there is a question from Anwesha Mukherjee, which sort of reflects several other questions. Was there any question in the survey related to increased competitiveness in the workplace? and how that the response to that varies by gender, but also background and disability would be interesting. And I think, although we don't have anything specifically on competitiveness, we can see whether, you know, there's increased well-being in the workplace, and whether that enhanced well-being in terms of voice of the worker, does that vary by gender? Can that be seen by different background, or indeed, as is outlined here by Anwesha, is there a difference in terms of those who are with disabilities or not?
In terms of voice, well, one thing that we see very clearly in the survey is that when it comes to formal representation at the workplace, through a works council, through a trade union committee, or at least a health and safety committee, we can see that around 75% of employees would have access to these forms of employee representation, but a fifth of workers do not have any form of employee representation at the workplace. There are big differences, unsurprisingly, between small and medium, small and enterprises, SMEs, and bigger companies. There are big differences between sectors. I have to admit that I have not yet, or we have not yet looked at gender differences. Again, a sector with good representation would be public administration, which is has a strong female participation. So that's something that we would have to look at. Around the competitiveness argument, I mean, I think it is the link we make is between the need for a healthy, engaged, motivated workforce, a workforce that is ready to learn, as a prerequisite for anticipating and managing change and staying or becoming more competitive. And in order to get to this healthy and motivated and engaged workforce ready to learn, we need job quality that allows this to happen. And again, I already explained the link for some of these elements. We need jobs that are fairly paid, that are safe, trusting, supportive social environment, acceptable levels of work intensity, good working time quality that allows for work-life balance, the opportunity to develop skills, but also to use the knowledge, and good prospects and pay. And then we have the conditions for ending up with the intended work-life outcomes of good levels of health and well-being, good levels of engagement, readiness to learn, apply skills, etc. So that is the link to competitiveness that we make in the survey, and that we for which we can analyze the results of the survey.
Which, of course, is very timely in terms of the current priority for competitiveness at EU level. And indeed, referencing our own Commissioner Manzatu, who referenced the importance of high job quality in terms of addressing the issue of poverty, which is another high priority issue on the EU agenda in terms of the anti-poverty strategy. I mean, Peter Austin here and Oviju are asking you, Barbara, that you mentioned here the 75% of access to representation, but do we know how many are actually organized?
Organized as in terms of a trade union? No, the question that we're asking is refers to different possibilities. As I said, it could be a works council, it could be a trade union committee, it could be a health and safety committee. So we package this as one formal worker representation, but we do not go into detail. Are these organized through trade unions? It's difficult to do that because the industrial relations systems in the different countries that are participating are so different that it would be difficult to word these questions in such a way that everyone in their specific national contexts would understand.
And there you've responded to another question, which was how does that level of access to workplace representation vary between countries and regions? And a lot would be the short answer to that. And of course, access all of that information in the detailed information which is online. In terms of coming back to this, Barbara, just very briefly on the age, we've talked about it very briefly, and we're coming to the end now. We're in our last 5 minutes. So just are there other aspects which are not maybe directly related to the digital side, which we need to look at in terms of the age inequalities?
Yeah, so if we look at job quality by age brackets, it's very clear the 30 to 54-year-olds, they have it best in the sense that they score highest, maybe unsurprisingly, for earnings, for prospects, for skills and discretion, and for the social environment. But then we have interesting two dimensions of job quality that actually get better with age. And that's working time quality and work intensity. So it's worst for the under 30s. So when you start out, working time quality not very good, work intensity high, and it's best for the 65 plus. So, and with each age bracket, you see an improvement for these two dimensions, working time quality and work intensity. Young workers are not yet doing well, not yet, in parentheses, doing well for earnings and prospects, and the latter, the poor prospects, is clearly linked to the fact that many of them are in less secure employment contracts. So fixed term contracts and job insecurity is a big concern for the youngest age group. And then for older workers, we've mentioned it before, the access to training is really the big issue. It has improved a lot. I think we also need to mention that, especially when it comes to employer-paid training. So that is improving. But the other aspect that is very important here, the on-the-job training is still at very low levels, not only for the 65 plus, but it starts in the 55 plus age bracket already. And this in the context of continuous technological change and the need to adapt is worrying, especially if we want to keep these workers, which we do, because demographic change does not allow us to say,
have a sustainable long-term approach to the workplace. And that leads us in, Barbara, because we could go on. I mean, there is no doubt that we could go on for more than the next afternoon and tomorrow again. But I wanted to kind of wrap up the question to you. I mean, here we have seen this is a good picture of job quality in general across the survey, but we also see that really we're looking at a quite vulnerable workforce. I mean, there's many issues at play. You've highlighted several of them. You know, the input of generative AI. We're looking at new changes and new context in terms of new issues in terms of the working conditions that people are exposed to. But we shouldn't forget that Europe is the world leader in working conditions. I mean, we have, we are at the vanguard of good quality working conditions, good quality jobs. It's something to keep in mind as we move forward. That's why we have the roadmap underway in terms of trying to enhance our job quality so that we do maintain our competitiveness and grow it. But in terms of the big picture, Barbara, looking at the survey, why should we maintain job quality at the top of this political agenda when there's so many other things to do out there? Is there a way of linking it? Do you have the silver bullet?
The silver bullet I do not have, but I fully subscribe to your analysis that we should not be careless and say, well, we are top in the world, we have achieved further improvements, we can check this box and say job quality, that's sorted, we do not have to care about that any longer. That is not what we can afford to do. And I would say for two main reasons. The first reason is these inequalities that we have been talking about for the past hour. And if we face this demographic change issue, we cannot afford to exclude or push out any group of workers because we cannot provide the job quality that they need out of the labor market. We would be shooting ourselves in the foot. We need everyone in and contribute as long as possible, and that requires good job quality, and that's why we need to look at those sectors and occupations and groups of workers particularly. And the second reason I've already mentioned, if we want to manage this change, if we want to manage a twin transition and retain our competitiveness, become more competitive in some areas, we have to have the outcomes that I listed before: healthy workers, high levels of well-being, good levels of work-life balance, and that can only be achieved with good working conditions. And that's what the working conditions survey, the European Working Conditions Survey, is so good at, to show these associations and those links.
Thank you, Barbara. Again, a font of knowledge and expertise. Thank you for joining us today, Barbara Gerstenberger. What Barbara has outlined is really a big picture of the positive developments and improvements which we can be happy and proud of in terms of our European approach to job quality, but clearly more to do. Improvements should be underway in lots of areas, the inequalities that have been outlined by Barbara this afternoon. This feeds into job quality, of course, but job quality and good job quality feeds into competitiveness. It will mean that we are better placed to fill the labour market shortages that we do face. It will help alleviate the poverty issues that we have across the European Union. It will look at tackling the gender equality issues which we have in the gender equality strategy. And indeed, it can contribute across a wide range of other areas. The Working Conditions Survey is really a gem. It is a diamond that we would offer up to all of you. You can find the data online. It is all available on our website. You can explore via our data explorer. You can find our first findings digital interactive story, which is available online, and indeed the PDF of the first findings. The overview report, which will flesh out all of this and more, will be available early next year, and we look forward to promoting and publishing that with you. There will be more analysis over the next little while, and we will be debating and continuing to discuss the issues surrounding the results over the next little while. So sign up and join us on our social media channels, sign up to our newsletter, keep in touch. And again, thank you to all of you who joined us and gave us your questions today. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I see my colleagues have been answering many online. If there's anything outstanding, please feel free to contact us directly after the webinar today. The webinar itself will be replayed, and you can find it on our website shortly and on YouTube. So again, thank you to Barbara. Thank you to you for joining us today. Thank you to my colleagues, and we look forward to next time.